Deep listening.
الاستماع العميق.
Deep listening.
Intensiv zuhören.
Deep listening.
Deep listening.
深度聆听.
Deep listening. Impact beyond words. Hi, I'm Oscar Trimboli, and this is the Deep Listening podcast series designed to move you from an unconscious listener to a deep and productive listener. Did you know you spend 55% of your day listening, yet only 2% of us have had any listening training whatsoever? Frustration, misunderstanding, wasted time and opportunity, along with creating poor relationships, are just some of the costs of not listening. Each episode of the series is designed to provide you with practical, actionable, and impactful tips to move you through the 5 levels of listening. So I invite you to visit oscartrimboli.com/Facebook to learn about the 5 levels of listening and how others are making an impact beyond words. Recently, I spoke at the annual conference for the Australian Conference Organisers Association. And whilst I was there, I had the opportunity to hear from Hugh Forrest. He spoke about how South by Southwest listens to attendees, sponsors, and the community.
South by Southwest is arguably the coolest entertainment trade show of the year, and we're back in downtown Austin. South by Southwest attracts a bunch of big names from a bunch of big industries. Film, gaming, music, comedy, and technology, which is a big reason why we're here right now. So last year when we were here, we talked with some pretty cool people, including Frank Oz, the voice of Yoda and Kermit the Frog, and the composer for La La Land. Previous speakers at South by Southwest, have included Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Cory Booker, and this year we have some big names as well. Melinda Gates is here, Eddie Q of Apple, and Chelsea Manning. Noni De La Pena is here, the godmother of VR. We've talked with her in the past, and she's giving a keynote speaking presentation this year.
Started in 1987, South by Southwest is an annual conference in Austin, Texas, and brings together over 50,000 people, creating hundreds of millions of dollars of economic impact. Hugh Forrest is the Chief Programming Officer for South by Southwest, and for decades he's been listening to the voice of the attendees. Hugh helps to answer the question, how do you listen to the feedback from 50,000 people? And then how do you distill 5,000 ideas so that you can create 1,000 great speaking opportunities for the next year? Hugh and his team take the time, and by time, I mean a lot of time, 6 weeks to sift through the feedback from the previous year's attendees. Hugh and his team make a point of engaging with people who've provided criticism, and as a result, they're both surprised and delighted when they're contacted. Yet despite this care, the collection of potential speakers, a voting system for the attendees, Hugh and his team nearly missed out on having one of the fastest growing social media companies of its time speak at their event in Austin. Let's hear from Hugh.
Deep listening.
Deep listening.
Tiefes Zuhören.
Deep listening.
Hugh, I'm curious what you struggle with when it comes to listening.
I think the thing that I struggle with the most and need to refine my approach on is bandwidth on listening. I love to talk to my staff and get their impressions. I love to talk to the community, whether that's the virtual community or the actual community, and get their impressions of what South by Southwest is doing well and not so well at. But I find that all those things are fairly time-consuming, and time is one of my most valuable assets at this point, as it is with, I would think, most of your users. So how to balance out those two concerns, how to spend a good amount of energy and bandwidth listening to users, listening to community, but also how to not have that absorb my entire day or entire week.
For an event of 30 years and hundreds of thousands of people who come through each year, what do you think the cost of not listening would be for South by Southwest?
I think the cost of not listening is you just lose your relevancy to your community. I think that in many ways and in many instances, your community, your users understand your product better than you do. And that's a difficult thing to say because you want to know everything about what you're doing, but they are certainly experiencing what you produce, your event, in a different way than you are as an organizer. So the more that you can listen to their experience, learn from their experience, understand what they liked about the event, understand what they didn't like about the event, try to figure out which of their concerns are most valid and which of the concerns may not have quite as much validity. I think the more relevant you can make the event and more compelling you can make the event. I feel like that over the 30-year arc of South by Southwest, the more that technology has evolved and evolved in fairly simple ways, the better we've been able to listen to our audience and learn from our audience and improve accordingly.
In the planning process, kicking off for the next year, there's so many stakeholders that you need to think about. There's the audience, of course, but there's speakers, there's sponsors, there's staff, there's the Austin community, there's the broader community across the United States, and South by Southwest has a global impact these days. Talk us through how you prepare and what some of the techniques you use to listen to the audience for the current year, for example.
Well, we spend what I like to say, or proudly say, is an inordinate amount of time reading through user feedback from the previous year. There are many good reasons for doing that. You learn about the event from a completely different perspective than you had as an organizer. There's often things that you learn that were great that you had no knowledge of. There are often things that you learn that didn't go so well that you had no knowledge of. And just reading this feedback gives you a much better perspective and much fuller perspective and much more nuanced perspective of what was good and what needs improvement. I'll also say that process of reading feedback, of digesting feedback, of trying to understand feedback, of listening to what your users and what your community is saying can be mentally, emotionally, spiritually exhausting. It's often not easy reading sharp criticisms of what you've done, particularly if you think you've done something incredibly great. But I think you try to have a generally positive attitude here and understand it's all part of the learning process and helps you get better. And throughout the most harsh criticisms and throughout the highest praise and the whatever objective truth is somewhere in the middle. But again, helps you do that by reading this feedback. So we'll spend 6 weeks reading feedback, trying to analyze that feedback, try to put that into some general themes and even more specific themes. And then by about late May, early June, we're beginning to plan for the next year. And one of the big pieces in terms of planning for the next year is this South by Southwest panel picker interface that we've been using for approximately a decade. This is a interface where anyone in the community, which basically means anyone with a web connection, can enter a speaking proposal. It is a system that allows us to listen to what the community wants, to get new ideas and new speakers into the event. We'll get somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 total ideas, speaking proposals for South by Southwest, of which probably about 1,000 of those will be accepted to the event. The other 4,000 are also, again, very, very useful in terms of trying to discern what our community wants to hear, what our community wants to learn about in the coming year. Is it that in 2018, our community is much more focused on learning the latest technologies or the newest ideas about blockchain, or the latest technologies and newest ideas about security, or the latest ideas, newest technologies in terms of any of the other kind of verticals that we cover? But again, this panel picker system is ultimately a way for us to communicate with our audience, for us to learn from our audience, for us to listen to our audience. And I think it's one of the many things that has helped us continue to improve as an event.
Back in the late 80s where South by Southwest started, how did you collect feedback in the days where you didn't have this mass scale technologies?
It was certainly more word of mouth then and more reading accounts of the event in what was then the dominant media, which would be newspapers and magazines. South by Southwest started in 1987. We added in 1994 what was then this multimedia event and put ourselves 20 years back in the time machine, or 25 years back. That was right when we were at this beginning of the kind of internet era. So, the feedback mechanisms were certainly not as sophisticated then as they are now. But we also, another thing that we did then, maybe do less of now, was just, have focus groups, go out to lunch or have a coffee with someone who's attended the event and ask them what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it. Try to get a different perspective on what you produced, and again, what was good about it and what was less good about it. Certainly everyone will have a different opinion and everyone will have different ideas, but the more people you can listen to and the more inputs you can have there, the more you can kind of get a sense of, well, generally people liked this aspect, generally people thought this aspect wasn't as good, and move forth accordingly. There's sometimes that I think that as an event organizer, maybe you don't listen to your audience, and maybe you make the decision that the audience isn't quite as informed as you are, but those instances are few and far between. Your audience is your lifeblood, and the more you understand what they are saying, what they want, I think the stronger you become.
Organisationally and individually, when you see complaints or those sharp criticisms that you talked about earlier on, what do you do with them? Because there's one thing for surveys to collect information. It's quite another for the people who took the time to provide the feedback to know that you've heard them. How do you close the loop in those situations?
One of the things that the exercises that we've done within my staff in terms of processing this feedback is that each staff member has to read something in the neighborhood of 300 or 400 total feedback records, and the record could be fairly long depending on how much time and effort the particular attendee put into that process. It is absolutely great and ego enriching and fun and heartwarming, and sends tingles up your spine when you read someone who said, I had a great time at your event. South by Southwest is the highlight of my year. I got a new job. I met my girlfriend there. I decided to move to Texas, and all those great things. That's great. But again, more beneficial is when you read someone who has sharp criticisms or complaints about the event and brings up specific and focusable issues that could be changed in the future. So again, with this feedback project that I have my staff do, part of what their exercise is responding via email to the people who had complaints and reaching out to them, trying to create a dialogue. In about, a little less than half the cases, I'd say the person will respond back, and usually respond back pretty positively. Wow, I can't believe that someone actually read what I had to say, and I really appreciate you having a dialogue with me. There's often nothing that can be done to solve this person's particular problem since it happened in the past. But again, people, by and large, like to know that they're being listened to and that their complaints, their issues, their challenges are being taken seriously. There's sometimes when people who had complaints respond negatively, and my instruction to my staff is there's no point in getting into an online shouting match with this person. Just don't respond at that point. But again, in many cases, reaching out creates a bridge and creates a relationship and wins someone back to the event. And they say, wow, there's someone's actually listening to what I'm saying. Someone's actually taking my experience and the problems I had seriously. Someone's absorbing my experience into how they will reform the event in future years. And again, some of our best customers have come from people who initially had that negative experience, but we reached out to and created a personal connection there.
Do you have a couple of memorable complaints?
One of the biggest complaints that we will get, the challenges we will get at this point, is people not being able to get into a session, a panel, a presentation because it was too crowded, and just being really upset about that problem. And we have a pretty good way to respond to these people now. But ultimately that response is simply saying, I'm really sorry. We try to figure out and match what perceived attendance to room size, but it doesn't always work. And we're really sorry that you couldn't get into this session in 2018, but there were all these other great sessions. Did you get a chance to go to any of those?
Listening to thousands and thousands of survey responses, how do you and your team work through that to sift out the patterns that inform the themes going forward?
We will have a day-long staff meeting where people on the team present their experiences and what they saw in their feedback and some of the ideas that seemed to pop to them the most, as well as the experiences of reaching out to customers, what went right, what went wrong. It lets everyone on the team hear what other people have been doing, learn from them, identify it sometimes with the things they've said that match with their own experience. I'm a firm believer that learning to speak in public, whether that's in front of 10 people or 20 people or 200 people or 2,000 people, is a life skill that can help you in many, many different ways. And asking people to present like that in front of a group helps us get better. And this bottom line, which you're so focused on, and hopefully we're focused on, is listening to your customers. And the more you listen, the more you learn.
What are the other processes or inputs that you use to keep South by Southwest relevant over the 3 decades that you've been going?
Predicting the future is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly difficult. And if it weren't difficult, more of us would be doing much better with whatever we're doing. But knowing what's going to happen or imagining what's going to happen in a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years is borderline impossible. One of our competitive advantages in that regard, however, is that the scale of an event like South by Southwest, where we're putting on, hosting literally 1,000 panels and presentations on literally hundreds of different topics. So in terms of predicting the future, we may be wrong on most of those topics, but the fact that we're addressing so many means that we're right on a couple also. And that ends up looking pretty impressive, the ones that we are right on and correct on in terms of trends that when we say this is going to be big in a few years, and if we were correct on that. Certainly it is much, much harder for events that are smaller, that are not doing the scale of panels and presentations that we are, to accurately predict, because you just have fewer bullets to spend there, so to speak. I will say that the quality that we've bet on for the last 30 years and will continue to bet on for the next 10, 20, 30 years, however long South by Southwest is lucky enough to survive, is creativity. And we've always bet that creativity is popular now, will be popular next year, and will be popular 5 years from now. And as much as the world has changed in that 30 years since South by Southwest started, creativity is still an incredibly powerful component of all of our lives.
What are the big successes that have come out of Panel Picker, and maybe what are some of the bigger failures that have come out of Panel Picker too?
The panel picker is a interface, again, that we developed about 10 years ago. Anyone who can get online can enter a speaking proposal. And there's about a month-long period where speaking proposals can be entered. After that month-long period, we have about 2 weeks where we kind of polish up everything that's been entered. And then we have an interface where all those ideas are displayed. And again, it's in the neighborhood of 5,000 total ideas. So it's a really long, big, large interface. Looks kind of like it looks like a Gmail interface, basically. The easiest way to digest this is to use the search function to search the topic that most interests you, whether, again, that topic is wearables or big data or healthcare or, artificial intelligence, entrepreneurism. And when you type that into the search function, you'll get the 20 to 40 to 60 speaking proposals that are on that cover that topic. You'll see a title for the proposed session. You click on that title and you can read a description of that proposed session as well as the proposed speakers. Users can do a simple thumbs up or thumbs down to vote on the session. There's also a comment section where they can comment on a proposal. Hey, I really like this because this is the wave of the future, and these speakers I've heard before, they're absolutely fantastic. Or you can say the opposite. I don't think this is relevant to the kinds of stuff that South by Southwest should be covering. One of the initial successes of the panel picker was, again, understanding how powerful this concept of kind of users, people who would enter ideas, sharing their ideas with their networks and telling their networks, "Hey, vote for my idea in the panel picker," and thereby pushing the panel picker interface and by extension pushing awareness of South by Southwest. For any given proposal that is entered in the panel picker, there are 3 components to a total score that proposal gets. One component is public voting, i.e. how many thumbs up they get. Another component is how our advisory board, their judgment of the given proposal, and that means 5 or 6 people from the advisory board will read each proposal and comment on that and rate that proposal, and then staff will judge each proposal also. And the idea of having 3 different components is that helps mitigate this from simply being a popularity contest, that if you have 1 million Twitter followers or Facebook followers, you don't have a advantage or a significant advantage over someone who has a much less robust social media following. So in terms of successes or failures, I think one of our biggest failures in the panel picker is several years ago, we had a small social media company that entered a speaking proposal. And this small social media company was relatively unknown at the time. So the speaking proposal got only a few votes. 2 of the votes were thumbs up, 3 of the votes were thumbs down, not very much there. The advisory board didn't particularly like it. The staff who were rating it didn't particularly like this proposal. So the proposal was not accepted as part of the event. And like a lot of the proposals that come in, it got a letter or got an email saying, "Thank you for entering your idea into this interface. We really appreciate you sharing your creativity with us. Unfortunately, your idea didn't make it into this year's event, but we encourage you to come anyway." The postscript of this story is that a small social media company was Pinterest, and between the time that they had initially entered the panel picker proposal and the time that the 4 or 5 months later, when the acceptance and "sorry you didn't make it" letters went out, Pinterest had very much exploded. So we were eventually able to find a speaking slot for them. And was evidence that this system doesn't always work. In terms of some of the big wins out of the panel picker, To me, the biggest win, or one of the biggest wins, is simply using the panel picker as a barometer of what the community is interested in. 2 years ago in the panel picker, we saw a huge uptick in the number of proposals that focused on chatbots. And that made sense because chatbot technology had all of a sudden launched and become very popular. And if you recall 2 years ago, a lot of tech pundits, futurists, whatever you want to call it, said that chatbots were going to be the next huge thing. And sure, chatbots are still around. They haven't gone away, but they haven't quite popped in the way we thought we would. That said, the fact that we went from 0 proposals on chatbots 1 year to 30 the next year was strong indication that our community wanted to learn more about this. It was strong indication that how powerful the whole concept of AI was becoming in this community, and AI being kind of the simplest way to explain the technology that powers a lot of this chatbot functionality.
One of the things I noticed in working with you was how prompt you replied to an email and how engaged you were in your response. Talk to us how you stay engaged and listen to your staff.
I'm generally pretty good at meeting with staff people, encouraging them to come and talk to me when they're happy or not so happy, when they have an issue, when they have something they want to talk about, when they have a new idea. Again, that's that's challenging to scale, that kind of availability to talk with people. But I believe that simply sitting down with someone and talking to them is a show of respect, a show of that you value their contribution. You may not always agree with what they're saying, but again, willingness to meet is an important thing. I'm certainly better, or one of my best skills, and I appreciate the nice words on it, is responding to emails quickly, or responding to most emails quickly. And that is, again, I think a function of customer service, of wanting to show the people that you're dealing with that you respect what they have to say, that they want to communicate. In the line of work that I do, which is a lot of trying to get people to speak at South by Southwest. It's when you're trying to pull in big names, you're getting rejected quite often. But it's always nice when you invite someone to speak and you get a response back. Thanks for the invite. I can't do it this year, as opposed to just never hearing back and wondering, well, did they even open the email, or did it go into their spam folder? So again, to me, the fact of trying to respond promptly, respectfully to emails, trying to communicate with everybody is an important part of showing your place in the community and respecting your community. I certainly, there's some days I'm better than this than other days. It is something that I think that a lot of people have noticed with me, and I certainly take pride in that people have appreciated that they can get a fairly quick response out of me. And I think, often, and I'm having to remind myself of this, that often I don't have a great answer to the person, but even saying, hey, I got your email, I don't have an answer for you yet, or I can't solve this problem yet, but know that I'm thinking about it and I'll get back to you at some point soon. Again, that process of communication is important.
Deep listening.
הקשבה עמוקה.
L'écoute profonde.
Deep listening.
I admire the care and the speedy replies from Hugh. I noticed that while I was working with him on constructing this podcast. I think leaders set the tone when it comes to listening. They set the example for their teams, for their organisation as well. And Hugh is a wonderful example of a leader who listens. From the systems he used to collect the potential event topics, allowing attendees to vote on these topics, and then spending up to 6 weeks to distill feedback and themes from the previous year event, is really a great example of listening deeply. It's a little wonder why South by Southwest has continued to grow. And Hugh's been asked on many times, can he take the event out of Austin and take it global as well? One thing I'll do differently is understand, how do I acknowledge people in email in a way that's appropriate? I think that was a great listening tip from Hugh, even if a response is not required. To the team that listens to me, to Johnny, to Nell, and to June, thanks for being part of the journey towards 100 million deep listeners in the world. And to you, thanks for listening.
Deep listening.
Deep listening. Lourdes Lascelles.
Deep listening.
Deep listening.
Whakarongo Pohonu.
Deep listening. Impact beyond words.